Good morning, Cornerstone. It is good to see you. Thanks for choosing church today. If you have a copy of God's Word, let me invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 25. We're continuing this series as we're looking at the great parables of the Lord Jesus, and we're continuing today in Matthew chapter 25. So if you have a copy of God's Word, find your way there. We're going to begin reading here in verse 14 here in a minute. I don't know if I'm going to share a phrase, and I don't know if this means anything to anyone in this room. But this phrase actually sends shivers down my spine. It's the phrase, why not, my not? Does that mean anything to anyone in this room? If you were in the Air Force, that might be a phrase that does the same thing to you that it does to me. See, here's the context. While I was in training, preparing for my next job assignment, my first permanent duty station, we were all anticipating where it is that we were going to be sent. We had given our lives to the U.S. government, and one of the things about being in the military is they give you this dream sheet. They say, hey, pick 10 destinations that you would like. And I put down Hawaii and Florida and all these other things, and they're like, they just laugh at them, you know. That's why they call it a dream sheet. And so we would go by our mailboxes, and pretty regularly we would have people that would look in their kind of snail mailboxes here, and their assignments would have come in. It was a special colored paper. They would pull them out. And pretty regularly we would hear people pull out their sheet, and they would go, oh, why not Minot? And what that meant is they were being sent to Minot, North Dakota. So here's the thing about North Dakota. My guess is that none of us in this room, we've never met someone from North Dakota. You have never in your life, when you've talked about your family vacation, said, you know, have we ever thought about North Dakota? It's never happened. You know how our phones like listen to us? You know, you start talking about something. Like I could be talking about Bali, and the next day I get an ad for Bali, right? I've been talking about North Dakota all week, no ads. I don't even know if North Dakota actually exists at this point. So a few of us have been there. But people would get stationed at Minot, North Dakota. This is a cold, desolate place. So flat, like you can see your dog run away for 3 days. It's like horrible. And people would regularly pull out their assignments, and they would see that they're going to Minot, North Dakota. And so it was terrifying for us. I mean, people were fine going to the Middle East. They were fine going to South Korea. They did not want to go to North Dakota. And so when my assignment came in, I saw in my mailbox my name, this special colored paper, and I pulled out my assignment, and I was like, please, Lord, please, Lord, please, Lord, please, Lord. And I looked at it, and you know what it said? It didn't say Minot, North Dakota. No, you guys are sick. It did not say Minot. It said Denver, Colorado. And all I could think was, it doesn't say Minot. Thank you, God. But what was amazing about my first permanent assignment that I received is that I was sent to just the right place. To be completely honest. Not that it wasn't Minot, but it was exactly where I needed to be. To know the people that I was going to be able to meet there. Most importantly, the church that my wife and I, newly married, I'd been a believer for 11 months at that point. And I get stationed at this base, our apartment's right around the corner from this great church where I got to know the Lord in deep and rich ways. God called me to ministry in that church, gave us friends for a lifetime in that church and in that community. And it was exactly what God had for us. God's in charge of all things. You probably know that, and we say that pretty regularly. But he is. The kind of the big theological word that we would use, we call that sovereignty, right? Sovereignty means that he's over everything. He's in charge of it. He didn't just make it, he keeps it. And so that's what God's sovereignty means. He is governing all things that he has created. But not only is God sovereign in all things, but there's another word that we don't often use. It's called God's providence. What God's providence is sovereignty, again, is God's in charge of everything. He controls it all. But providence is the way in which God controls things. Like he's in charge, but he's moving and he's making and he's shaping. And listen to this, he's assigning certain things, certain responsibilities. He's giving talents and gifts and abilities and resources and yes, assignments to people providentially that are moving towards his ultimate sovereign purpose and plan. That's what he does. That's what he did in my life by not giving me, praise God, not Minot, North Dakota, but Denver, Colorado, and he's given you assignments as well. And what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at a parable where Jesus is teaching us this principle of Actually, the larger term would be biblical stewardship. The fact that, and if you don't know what biblical stewardship just means our outlook on all things that we have in life are really captured in three statements. Number one, God owns everything. We're not the owners of anything. God is the owner of absolutely everything that there is. God owns it all. That's principle number one. Principle number two is that God owns it all, and some of what God owns, he's entrusted to you and to me. So he's entrusted things to us like talents, resources, abilities. He's given us different assignments. He's given us different titles. You know, if you carry the title boss or coworker or mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or brother or sister, whatever those are things that God's assigned to you. He's assigned the time and the place that you're going to be born, the family that you originate from. All those things, God has given you those things. That's principle number two. And then principle number three is this. He owns it all. Some of what he owns, he's entrusted to you. And then number three, those things that he's entrusted to you are not primarily for you. Those things are given to you, and you are supposed to leverage and invest those things for his kingdom to advance. Yes, there's some stuff that comes to you, and it's to care for you, but ultimately it's for his kingdom to advance. And that's exactly what this parable that Jesus is teaching here today is going to help us to just, for some of us to be reminded of, and for others maybe to jolt us out of our sleepiness and come back to this principle that God has entrusted us with lots and lots of things, so many things. Maybe even through this message, you'll go through the list of the so many things for you that he's entrusted you with. And we have a responsibility to invest those things well for his kingdom's sake. Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 14. Jesus is telling a parable here to his disciples about what life is supposed to look like in the in-between. The in-between is when Jesus ascended into heaven and the time when Jesus is going to come again. By the way, we live in the in-between, right? If you want to know what we're supposed to be about in our day and age, in this time in between Jesus' ascension and his return, this is what we're supposed to be about. Matthew 25, verse 14. Again, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. And then he left on his trip. And the servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money, and he earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip, and he called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had trusted 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid that I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops and didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they're given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant out into outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And obviously he's describing here Minot, North Dakota. So what is it What is it that God wants to teach us through this parable? What is it that Jesus wants his disciples to know? What is he talking about that's been entrusted to them? Well, three principles, if you're taking notes, that I want you to notice. First of all, what we learn first and foremost is that whatever you do, know this, that it is uniquely from the Lord. It is uniquely from the Lord. There is a master, right? And this is a story that Jesus is telling. He wants us to see that the master obviously is God here. It's Jesus is the master ultimately that's giving these things to the disciples. But God has entrusted his people with an investment. He's entrusted them with certain things. Verse 14, he says, the kingdom of heaven, it's illustrated this way, that a man goes on a long trip. What Jesus is telling his disciples is, I'm going away on a very long trip. How long? At least 2,000 years, right? He is going away for a very long time. And so he calls his servants together and he entrusts his money to them while they're gone. And then listen to this. He gave them 5 bags, 2 bags, and 1 bag. If you don't know what a bag of silver is, the word is actually talenton in the Greek. Talenton, some translations, old translations, do you remember this as the parable of the talents? Does anybody remember that? What's confusing about that is when we say the parable of the talents, we think it's like talents, like our gifts or abilities. That's not what it means. Talenton in the Greek, it's just a certain weight of money. It was approximately 75 pounds of coin. That could be silver coin, gold coin, whatever it is. The New Living Translation that we're using today, it translates it bags of silver, which it very well could have been. But here's what you need to know. A bag of silver was worth about 20 years' annual wage. And a commentator that I was reading in 2013, he wrote that the equivalency of 1 bag of silver in 2013 would have been $500,000. Like when the master says, I entrusted you with a small amount, just think, in God's eyes, $500,000 is small. Which, by the way, if $500,000 is small to you, welcome to Cornerstone Church. We're so glad that you're here. But he gives 5 bags, right? So I'm not super great at math, so I did this ahead of time. He gave $2.5 million to one person. He gave $1 million to person number 2. And person number 3 got $500,000, not chump change for anyone, right? Here's the question, and I don't know if reading through this, if you're thinking this, why didn't the master give them an equal share in order to see what they might produce with an equal share, right? I mean, that is our capitalistic kind of mindset. Like, hey, give everyone, let's call it $1 million, and let's just see who does well with it. Why doesn't he do that? Well, one of the things that I think Jesus is trying to teach us in this parable is he's trying to teach us what the economy of heaven looks like. And he's going to great lengths to teach us this principle. And this is going to sound weird, and you're not misunderstanding what I'm saying here, okay? What he's trying to teach us is this, is that in God's kingdom economy, things are given out, talents and abilities and assignments, they're given out unequally. God gives out certain things to certain people in certain ways at certain times, and he does it for his own purposes, not your own. And that's frustrating to us, right? Have you ever met someone, like there may have been somebody up on the stage today, and they can sing well, but they also are wildly successful in business, but they're also great at their, being in their role in their family, and they're just great at everything, and you just hate them, right? You're just like, how can you be so good and so talented at everything or whatever? And you're going, man, that's just a 5-talent person. God does that sometimes. And there's also 1-talent people, and you probably don't think you're that, but it's just all over the place. And here's the reason. God has a plan that he's working. He assigns certain people, certain assignments and tasks and abilities and resources because he has the master plan. He's building a kingdom, and he does it exactly the way that he wants to do it. And how it shakes out to us is it's unequal. It just is. And we have to be okay with that. I think the principle that he's trying to teach us here is this. It's not about what you get, it's about who you get it from. And if you get 1 talent from the king, guess what? That's amazing. It's incredible that he would entrust you with anything, let alone 1 bag or even 1 coin. It's who you get it from. It's not about what you get from him. And that's what he's trying to teach here. And by the way, in verse 15, it tells us how he distributes it. It says at the end that he divided it in proportion to their abilities. You see, God knows. He knows what you're capable of. He knows what he's wanting to accomplish. And so he distributes it unequally. And sometimes that just feels flat out unfair. But what you see happening in the first two people, which are obviously the models that we're supposed to follow, is it doesn't matter what their share is. I'm actually really impressed by guy number two. Guy number two does really, really well. He's the one that does not receive the 5, he receives the 2, but he gladly goes to work, right? He's so content in his assignment because of who it came from. Now, I went through a little bit of a struggle a number of years ago. This bag that I have up here, my kids came to call this backpack Dad's Mission Backpack. So when I went into my closet and I dug out my mission backpack and I had this spread out on the bed and I was rolling up my clothes and I was putting them in this bag, the kids knew that I was going on another mission trip. Now, I've been on about 45 short-term mission trips in my life. I've had the privilege of going all over the world multiple times and taking this missions backpack with me. And so when I would get this out, I would get excited. My kids would get distraught, but I was excited. And so I'd pack this thing up, and then I've got this in just incredible countries and phenomenal places where God's activity, is just, it's tangible, It feels different when you're on mission oftentimes. And so there's just something special about wherever this bag was, there was incredible things that I was witnessing and participating in there. Well, I got convicted one day. I was not on a mission trip. I was actually at home. I was having a really frustrating week. I don't know if that happens to you. The job that I was in was actually in a church. And sometimes, I don't know if you know this, jobs in churches are sometimes frustrating. And so I came into my closet and I actually saw this backpack hanging up in my closet. And I just thought, man, I'm so frustrated here. I should just go on a mission trip. Like, missions is where it's at. It's where I feel God working, and I feel his presence and all these other things. And I just got convicted in that moment by this simple thought that wherever this bag is, and this bag happened to be in my home at that particular time, wherever that bag is, that is the most exciting place that I could possibly be. And so I actually have used this. I've kept this bag. I've actually retired this bag because it's super impractical. But I've retired this bag as my missions backpack. But I hold on to it as a reminder that wherever this bag is the most important assignment I can possibly have on planet Earth. The most important assignment for me right now on planet Earth of all other assignments is being a pastor at Cornerstone Church on September 15th, 2024. It's the most exciting, thrilling place that I could possibly be. Why? Because that's what God has for me. And that's what he has for you. Whatever your backpack is, wherever your place is right there, know that it is God's assignment for you, and it's exactly where he wants you to be. And that's what makes it exciting. Not what it is, but who it's from. God gave you assignment. And you're sitting in that assignment. You're participating in that assignment of the titles that you wear, of the home that you live in, and the community that you're a part of, the office that you're a part of the school that you're a part of. He's assigned that to you. And know that that came uniquely from him to you. Whatever it is that you do, this parable teaches us, know that it is ultimately from the Lord. He has given you that. And you're to live and work in light of that truth. Number 2, not only is it uniquely from the Lord, but we also see that whatever you do, know this, that it is ultimately for the Lord. It's not just from him, but the assignment that he's given you, the place that you're at right now, the assignment, it's ultimately you're working for him. It's bigger than your paycheck. It's bigger than your boss. It's bigger than your family. You're working for the Lord. And the two guys that we noted, the servants that we get a glimpse of, they get that. Verse 16, it says, the servant who received the 5 bags of silver began, and actually the word immediately is used there. New Living doesn't translate that word. I wish they did. But it says that he immediately began to invest the money, and he earned 5 more. Verse 17, the servant with 2 bags of silver, he also went to work and he earned 2 more. What they did is they immediately went. The master gives them an assignment. He says, go and work with this. Invest these resources in my name, for my name's sake, go and do that. And they go immediately and do it. Why do they do that? Well, what they're doing is they realize that they've been given a task. They've been given a job by their master, and they are gladly, willingly running towards that task to be obedient in that task. That's what they do. And I want to just point them out because we see guy number 3 as opposed to these first 2, what's happening here. But they gladly go out and they do it. And by the way, when it says that they go out and they start investing this money, it's not like they went down and they said, hey, I want to invest this in this particular stock, and they were done with it. There wasn't a stock market, right? What they're saying is they went out and they worked. They went to work with the resources that they had been entrusted to. They went to work. They were obedient in their work. But what happens to guy number 3? Verse 18. It says, but the servant who received 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground, and he hid the master's money. Why did he do that? Why did he do that? Well, we actually get a glimpse into his heart when he responds, when he comes back and the master calls him to account. Servant number 3 gives us a glimpse into his heart. Verse 24. The servant comes with his 1 bag of silver, and this is what he says. Listen to his heart posture towards the master. He says, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. And I was afraid, I was fearful that I would lose your money. And so I hid it in the earth, and look, here is your money back. And we know that the master is really ticked, right? But what it does is it reveals his heart posture, right? Guy number 1, guy number 2, they go, they understand their assignment, and they go to work on it immediately. Guy number 3, he is terrified of his assignment. The reason that he's worried about it is he has to invest. He has to go to work. He has to risk. Listen, obedience always requires risk. It does. You have to put yourself out there. Obedience requires risk. Go and invest and do this thing. This guy is not willing to risk. He's disobedient. He doesn't want to risk it. The reason that he's not willing to risk it is because what he thinks of the master. He says basically, hey, I know you're harsh. I know that you give resources out and then you expect something in return. He's saying, listen, I know that you're just exploiting people. Just listen to the ridiculousness of this. He goes, here's what I know about you. You give us resources and you expect us to work, and then you expect something back. How dare you? You give us gifts and talents and abilities and finances and all these other things, and then you want something back? How dare you? What a harsh man. And what a silly statement, right? And and we already saw he's being judged for this, right? One of the things that's really interesting about this is this man is being judged harshly. And why is he being judged? What this man didn't do is he didn't go out and he didn't blow the $500,000 that he had been entrusted, right? It doesn't say that he was guilty because he went out and he went down to the casino and he went down and he drank it all away or whatever it is, right? When we think about sinful things that we would do with the investment that's been entrusted to us. He doesn't do any of that stuff. You know what's just as bad as spending it on sinful stuff is sitting on it and doing absolutely nothing. He's been entrusted with so much, and all he does is he sits there and he does absolutely nothing. And he's just as guilty as somebody that would have spent it on sinful things. We can be just as guilty. Not that we're doing wrong things, but that we're not doing anything with the resources that God has entrusted to us. We're just as guilty, just as liable. And this man is unwilling to risk. He just sits and he hides this money so that he's hopefully safe. And what ends up happening is you find out that he is not safe whatsoever, right? He's not. It is risky to invest all things. It is risky to invest it all. But you know what's riskier than investing it all? Not risking at all. When you look at the Bible, you see story after story after story of people that are obedient by the way that they risk, right? In the same way, we also have these wonderful stories, thankfully, that are warnings to us of people that disobeyed and didn't risk. One that you might be familiar with, if you remember, God gave the people, the nation of Israel, a land, the promised land, and he led them out of slavery. And he's leading them into the promised land. And they send forth 12 spies to go and scout out what it is that God has for them. God says, I have a land for you. It's flowing with milk and honey. I mean, just like the fruit and the vegetation and the agricultural appeal of this. But also there's homes that are there that you didn't build that you can live in, and wells that you can drink from that you didn't dig. All of these wonderful things have been prepared for you. And the 12 spies go up and they see it's exactly how God described it. There's just one problem. There's giants in the land. There's big, gigantic people that wear big, gigantic armor, and they are armed to the teeth, ready to take down God's people. And so they come back, and 10 of the 12 spies come back, and they're like, it's exactly what God said, but we shouldn't do it. There's great big people. They're armed to the teeth. We should not do it. And the other two guys look, and they're like, are you an idiot? Like, God said that we're supposed to do this. He has brought us this far. We need to go into the land. And the 10 overcome the 2, and they end up being disobedient, unwilling to risk, unwilling to do what God had tasked them to do, the assignment that he had given them. And we know that the 10 men that went up and said, there's no way, they're too big, we can't do this. God strikes them with a plague and they die. And then the repercussions of them disobeying and the people receiving this report is that the entire nation of Israel, an entire generation dies off. 40 years of wandering in the wilderness because they're unwilling to be obedient. They're unwilling to risk. To be a follower of Jesus is to risk. It's to be obedient, to say, whatever it is that you have for me, God, I know this doesn't make sense in the economy of earth, but in the economy of heaven, the answer is yes, I'll go. And they're unwilling to do it. Listen, we put ourselves out there and we risk because we know who it is that we're working for ultimately. Listen to this. It's found in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 7. You know this text, but it says, work with enthusiasm as though you were working for the Lord rather than people. Just know that ultimately who we're working for is the Lord. Which, by the way, isn't that a wonderful truth when you're working and no one's watching? Or you're doing some meaningless work and you're just like, man, does anyone notice? Does it even matter? Yes, it matters because you're ultimately working for God. One of my favorite mission stories is Elizabeth Elliot. You may know her story. Her husband, Jim Elliot, was killed by the Auca Indians in Ecuador decades ago, with a small band of believers that were there to reach this unreached people group. And not only did Jim Elliot, he was killed by the Auca Indians, but miraculously his wife ends up staying behind to continue to reach these people that actually slaughtered her husband. And one of the works that she did is she went to work translating the New Testament into their native language. And so this was a daunting task if you know anything about translation. I mean, first of all, you're creating an alphabet for them, and then you're translating pieces of the New Testament so that they might be able to have God's word. What ended up happening one day is Elizabeth Elliot, after years of working on this translation, she comes home to her home there in the village, and there's the smell of smoke. And she goes in, and they see that her home is on fire, burning to the ground. And inside there, this is way before computers, inside her little hut was translations of scripture that she had been working on for months, some of them even years. And they were burned to the ground. There were no other copies whatsoever. Some reporters from the United States heard about this additional tragedy. They had reported on the first. They go back and they're interviewing her and they said, hey, you've been through so much, so many hardships. You say that God's looking over you and protecting you. And man, what do you do with this loss? How do you process this loss? And she looked at the reporter and she said, loss? What do you mean loss? She said, I was translating the Bible into these native folks' language, and I was doing it for the Lord. There's not a single thing that we do for the Lord that is ever lost. And so what I will do is tomorrow I will go to work, I will pick up my pen, and I will start this translation again. But please don't ever say that anything that we have done is loss. The reason I share that story is there's so many things. I don't know about you, but there's lots of things that we do in life, lots of things that we do in work, we do in school, we do in our families, and no one notices. But can I just tell you, God notices? He's paying attention. And those things that we don't do them to be noticed, do we? We do them for him. And he ultimately notices. C.S. Lewis noted one time that there are beautiful flowers on planet Earth that are on high peaks that no human eyes have ever seen. And he was just kind of pondering this thought. And in his own mind, he was asking this question: why are there beautiful flowers in beautiful places that human eyes will never see? And C.S. Lewis's response to the question he was asking himself was, there's just some things that God makes in beautiful places that are for his eyes and his eyes only. Some of the most beautiful things that are done on planet Earth are not noticed by human eyes. Some of the most beautiful things that you and I do will never be noticed by human eyes. And you know what? It's okay. Because the only eyes that matter are God's eyes, and he sees everything. Whatever it is that you do, know that it is ultimately for the Lord. And then number 3 is this. Whatever it is that you do, know this, that our ultimate aim is faithfulness. It's faithfulness in the end that matters most. What's really interesting is these servants, they're rewarded. They're rewarded not because of the amount that they've brought back, because of their faithfulness to the task. The reason that we know that is, the one comes back with the 5, right? Remember, that's $2.5 million. He comes back and he has actually raised that up in his investment, in his work. It is now $5 million that he is returning to the master. And listen to what the master says in verse 21. The master was full of praise. He said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." That's his response to this man coming back, and his return is $5 million. You're like, man, that's awesome. But notice this. In verse number 23, the man with 2 bags of silver comes back, and he has 2 more. So again, remember, he was entrusted with $1 million, and now he comes back with $2 million. And this is what he says. The master said, verse 23, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. Now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." And what do you notice about verse 21 and verse 23? They're the exact same statement. Now, wait a second. I told you I'm not great at math, but is $5 million the same as $2 million? If I said to you, hey, I have $5 million for you or $2 million for you, which one would you like? You'd go, dealer's choice. Whatever you think. You'd go, I want 5. If the choice is mine, 5. There's a $3 million disparity between these 2 outcomes, and yet they receive the same praise. Why? We use this, I'm going to use a phrase that we use in church, and it's a little bit cliche, but it really matters. It's not about fruitfulness, it's about faithfulness. It's not about the return on your investment. It's about the return on how much you've invested for the kingdom. Have you been faithful in that? That's what matters. By the way, if you're faithful with those things, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, fruitfulness comes. It's just kind of how the economy of heaven works. And he says the exact same statement to these individuals. And we know, of course, what happens to the 3rd individual. He is found unfaithful. Here's my question for you to just kind of think through today. Will you be found faithful that day? Will the statement that God will say to you, when you look over the course of your life, all of the talents, all of the resources, all of the abilities, all the assignments that God has given to you, in the end, will the master say to you, "Well done, good and faithful servant"? Here's a way to maybe test yourself and see where you are in this particular moment. I want you to imagine, I kind of joked about $1 million, but want you to imagine this. This is a check. If you're under the age of 30, this is called a check. These are paper things that we used to. Never mind. But what I want you to imagine is, let's say that I came to you after the service, and I had the ability to write a check in your name to every single person in this room, and I gave you a check, and I said, hey, Austin, I'm going to write you a check, and it's made out to you. $86,400. I'm going to give you $86,400. And there's only one stipulation. You have 24 hours to spend $86,400. Could you do it? None of it carries over to the next 24-hour period. You have to spend, anything that's left over is lost forever, but you have to spend $86,400. Now, some of you already know what you would buy if I gave you that check today, right? You already know what the boat is, and you would go and you would get it, right? But I came to you and I said that, you would probably have a pretty easy time spending that. So you spend it day one. Let's say day two, I come to you and I say, hey, got another opportunity for you. I'm going to give you a check for $86,400. The only stipulation is you have 24 hours to spend it. None of it carries over. Could you spend it? And day after day after day, I came and gave you that exact same amount, and you would be accumulating probably so many things. Some of you would share, most of us wouldn't, but you're spending it on things. Now, here's the reason why I use that number. Because God has given us, in every single day, in every 24-hour period, he has given us 86,400 seconds in every single day. And they're given to us freely. There's only one stipulation. You can spend them all in that one period, and you can't carry any of them over to the next day. When they're gone, they're gone. So brothers and sisters, my question for you as we kind of do an inventory of the investment of our lives today is, how have you done with 86,400 seconds that you've been entrusted with each day? How are you doing? For some of us, as we think about how God would want us to respond to the message today, for some of us, we just need a reminder that the place that God has us is the exact place that God needs us. And we don't like it. We feel like God has assigned us to our Minot, North Dakota. And man, we can't stand it. But it's okay, because that's exactly where God has you right now. He's entrusted titles and responsibilities. For some of us, he's entrusted circumstances, even hard circumstances, to us, because it's exactly where he wants us to be. For others, we're so frustrated by the work that we are doing. It's going unnoticed. People aren't seeing it. We're not getting a good return on what we're investing. We just need to be reminded that God's the one that sees it. And then lastly, we just need to understand that there's an investment that God has made in us. Every single day, he has invested something in us. And we have the opportunity to spend our hours, our days, our seconds, any way that we choose to. But are we choosing to spend them in a way that works through this system called biblical stewardship, to where we spend those hours so that his kingdom might come, his kingdom might advance in our world? God has entrusted us, brothers and sisters, with so many things. Are we investing well? Can we just do an inventory right now, just in this closing moment here? Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? And I want you just in your mind, I just want you to begin to think about all the things that God has entrusted to you. Would you just start to build a list in your mind right now of all the things that you have that God has entrusted to you? It could be material things. It could be bank accounts. It could be a job. It could be a home. It could be kids, grandkids, a spouse. I want you to think about those things. When you think about all those things, could we just take a moment and could we just thank God as the one, just remembering that he's the one that gave us those things, that they come from him? Would you just take a moment and just say thanks to him for those things? And then we just turn right back, acknowledging that they're from him. And wherever you are, would you, if you're willing to do this, would you just say back to him, God, all these things that you have entrusted to me, I want to go to work investing for you in the way that you would have me invest in all of these. Would you be courageous enough to just say those words back to him right now? Father, we work and we labor and we long for the good and faithful. God, we don't want to hear anything less other than our Master, our King, say to us, well done, my good and faithful servants. God, I pray that you would help us to be found faithful in today and in each day that you have invested things in us that are providing for us, but they're ultimately advancing your kingdom, God. May we be found faithful individually and as a church. We pray that you would help us to be obedient. Yes, that you would help us to risk. But we know, Lord, that there is a reward and a responsibility that you're going to give us in it. So we pray for your power in it, courage of conviction to do it.